Thank you, Dylan, and hello from Dublin. I'm missing home these days in particular. I'd like to be out in the loch, and I'd like to be listening to cuckoos and curlews and all the rest of it, but we're all doing what we can, and I hope you're all holding up pretty well. I'm going to read some poems from my book, Notions, which was the first book. I'm going to read some poems from the second book, which I hope will be out at the end of this year, but like everything else, it's on the back boiler for a while. And I might read something even from a book that's supposedly coming after that again. So, and I'll try and do ones that are kind of got some association with home, with Fermanagh, and with Enniskillen. This first one is called Space, and it's about childhood confusion. It's set in primary 4 in the school in Cornagrade, in the primary school, and a kind of confusion that happens when young people come into contact with adults, and also how that confusion then persists well into your own adult life. It's called Space. When Mrs. Adams tapped the blackboard with a red fingernail and spoke of space, and why I must put space between my words, all I could see were the planets and the stars, Saturn's rings, crescent moons, the Milky Way, Cassiopeia scratched and scraping up and down. Cosmonauts floated like giant babies between words like mum and dad. Laika the mongrel yelped at the universe between dog and cat. And elsewhere, in the dusty nebulae of green and yellow chalk, 3 American spacemen said their prayers, pressed all the buttons in Apollo 13, and thought tearfully of home. This morning, as all the little stars, newly formed in constellations, lined out in Cabinteely Park for their first competitive match, I watched my son in his outsized jersey chase a huge moon of a ball and try to make sense of yet more adult instruction. The mums and the dads, the dog on the pitch, the coach shouting, space, space, take your time, buddy, we have space. Now this next one is called Pike, and this is also set at home. This actually happened. I was out in the loch with Pat Lunny when this extraordinary event happened, and the poem is dedicated to Pat. It's called Pike, for Pat Lunny. Near Devonish, the boat tied sideways to a golden screen that would cut the hand off you and yet was soft and feather-headed too. I saw a scene in silhouette as unbelievable to me as Viking ghosts or risen Christs. A pike was plashing in the shallows, out of its depth entirely, and a water hen was riding on its back, attacking fins and gills, and giving out yards in its own astonishment. It was surely some mirage or wishful thought. But then the trembling reeds began to part, and just beneath the surface, the pike, perplexed by impulse, emerged just inches from the boat, to hang there like a mottled log, hints of wolfish gold and silver in the light. With one hand, I could have lifted it clear, held it heavy and sky high. But with no one to see it happen, I held instead its sinking, misbelieving glare, as slowly I began to shimmer, rise and fly. Another one, a newer one, called Local Knowledge. Again, this is only about a year old, out on the loch, this time with, again, in Pat's boat, sitting on Pat's stone, which is a big rock off one of the islands, which Pat has planted his flag on, and he owns it now. And I was there with him and my 13-year-old son, who was probably trying to make sense of what the two old fellas were talking about. Local knowledge. There are locals who would know that when the pollen start to spawn, a mighty fleet of pike migrates in hunger from here to over there, to where that hardly local yacht silhouettes itself among 7 wild islands, none of which I can confidently name. Say, for the sake of argument, those two lads puttering past me now, biting down hard on roll-your-owns in their dirty, always flooded boat. You wouldn't know to look at them, but they have the measure of such marvels as were known to Pliny, Aristotle, and Descartes. That swallows overwinter underwater, that eels come from mud, that monkeys can talk if they want to, and that barnacle geese don't hatch from eggs, but grow instead on overhanging trees, and are not birds at all, but fish. This one is from a book I'm working on and have been working on, to be honest, for many, many years, and it's only coming together now in the last couple of months. I've always been interested in all things American, and I think a lot of that stems from stories my father used to tell about the American soldiers in Fermanagh during the war. He would have known a lot of them. He was just a kid, but he would have known a lot of them because a lot of them were based out in Celtic Park, in Camp Rendrum. A lot of these guys were around the town, and people got to know them. So I've been working on this for quite a while, but this is a small, tiny little part of it. It's called Salinger in Fermanagh. Speculation, yes, but when blueberries first appeared in the town of Enniskillen, J.D. Salinger had them in a paper bag. This was Gas Lane in 1944. The Yanks were gathering for war, but would sometimes call for bread and tea. Usually Curtis, Hank, and Red. But then this other guy with blueberries, and my grandmother, improvising, put them in a tart. She remembered him well, as much for the blueberries as anything else. She said he was polite and lovely and tall. The two Miss Gallaghers were pretty sure of it. How many Jeromes do you know, they said, apart from the songwriter and the saint? The records place him elsewhere, but Jerry was intelligence. His whereabouts were widespread and unknown. And then that photograph at a desk in the open air, in behind McCanny's house, imagining Holden Caulfield, in front of a hedge still growing there. So yes, I do believe in yarns these days. I might as well, poking through relics and remains, buried ordnance, bits of bunks and pots and pans, sheet music, Bibles, pencil stubs, ribbons from a Hermes featherweight, what might be a list of characters' names. I'm going to read one which is set in America. This is from the book. This was written way back. There was a massive blizzard in New York in '96, and I was fortunately stuck there. It's called P.J. Clark's, although come to think of it, Clark was probably a Fermanagh man originally too. But it's a bar, saloon, very famous place on 3rd Avenue. And it was a haunt of a few well-known people who would come into it extremely late at night when there was nobody else there, except possibly me. P.J. Clark's, it's called. Midtown in a blizzard, the last of the snowbound strays. I'm down the back beside the jukebox, nursing a JD and listening to Lady Day whispering, as Frank O'Hara said, along the keyboard to Mal Waldron. The bartender sighs, looks over his glasses, smoothing the woodwork with a cloth. And just as I call for another jack, the purple sky turns all magnesium flash, and not for the first time, in walks Frank Sinatra. The small, hard snowball in a muscled testudo of goons. The record jumps. The bartender stops. But I sit my ground when the huddle breaks and Frank is loosed, a face on him that would turn milk. He clocks me right away, lonesome keeper of the condiments, curate of the heavy shot glass. But I nod to nothing as he passes me by into the back room, where the ghosts of women with beehive hair are laughing hard and waiting for the word, for some decisive flash of blue. I return to the jukebox, put Billy on again. And that's when Mr. Sinatra appears suddenly at my elbow, as if to tell me some half-a-gangster news. And in the clearest voice, he says to me, "You know, kid, lady was the best. She walked sideways, she talked sideways, and she sang sideways." To this day, I still don't know what, if anything, he meant by that. But as I settle up that night, I send a JD to the back room. Then, shoulders hunched against the cold, I step soft into 3rd Avenue and snow. The city is empty, sepia, tranquilized. I stand shin deep with 50-something blocks to go, and all I can hear are the fumes of my own breath and the whiskey's throbbing burn. I wonder, am I wrong to call them goons? I wonder, am I lonely here, or just contentedly alone? On another one from the book, also set in New York, but much later, because it's dedicated to one of my daughters, to my eldest daughter, Evie, well, she's 18 now, but she was 15 when I wrote this. And if you have a 15-year-old daughter, you'll know what this is about. The Metropolitan Museum of Art is a most wonderful place to visit, and there are rooms in there when the poem says this, but you go into certain rooms, and as soon as you arrive, they've got everything in the room. You just know as soon as you arrive, you see these paintings around the wall, and everything is there. You recognize everything. It's quite an experience. The Metropolitan Museum of Art for Evie at 15. There's a room in New York City, and to stand on its threshold is like entering heaven, or at least as heaven was once explained to me. Loved ones gathered, old friends beaming, all tippy-toed and welcome, as excited by your sudden arrival as you are yourself. Or maybe, just to leave heaven out of it for now, it's like a surprise birthday party, and everyone is overwhelmingly there. All your treasured ones assembled, some you haven't seen in years, glimpsed already in the corner of your eye. Anyhow, I can tell you exactly where it is and how to get there, by subway, bus, or yellow cab, or better still on foot, the scenic route through Central Park. I can scribble a map, I can tell you what's in store, but more and more, my darling girl, I can only leave you to the door. I'll read 2 more, 2 new ones. This one's called The Shed, where I've been spending a ridiculous amount of time recently. Although even I find the shed, which was once my sacred space, has been taken over by the children. The Shed. A coffee cup, ceramic and Greek, is balanced on the saddle of a bike. I can hardly move these days for bikes, piled on each other like anonymous bones in the catacombs of Paris or Rome. Ancient memories now of barrow, tumulus, and souterrain. My shambles of a hideout, my through other doghouse, my ruined lair. This is my shanty, my bothy, my bat cave, my dacha, and my swineherd's hut. Ramshackle meeting house for ashlings and spiders, angels, demons, and shades. Here of an evening I have both flown and fallen, sailed the seas and sunk. To think that beneath this wasted mirror bow, a silent hedgehog killed a rattlesnake, that swans once landed in a snowstorm and went flying on a frozen lake. And I'll finish with a poem which isn't set in Fermanagh, it's set further west in Connemara, which is a place very dear to me. The deeper into it, the better, and the quieter, the better. And there's a place I know very well, and even after years of knowing it quite well, I discovered there was actually a river flowing into it that you could only travel at certain times a year, and even then you could only go a certain distance. Didn't even know it was there. So I'll finish with this, and I want to thank Dylan for inviting me, and I want to wish everybody well at home. I wish I was there right now, actually, of an evening out on the loch, and hope everybody's holding up pretty well. And as we're all saying to each other, I'll see you on the other side. So mind yourselves and stay safe. And I'll finish with this poem called The Hereafter. Nobody knows it's here. You can't see it from the road, or the mountain, or the bog. It's so well hidden, it's a mystery even to the lake to which it flows. Usually it's barely there at all, just a trickle over whitened stones. But when cold rain falls for days on end, the secret river fills and runs and swells. Everything's perfected then in a cool, fluorescent atmosphere. Sunlit black and lime green banks, jeweled gravel set for trout. Enter here by rowboat, disappear. Thanks all. Stay safe.